taxes go back to the very beginning of civilization. It impacts every aspect of society and our lives. That's why we need to know a bit more about the history of taxes, how they came around, and how it all began. You could say that while agriculture started civilization, taxes shaped it. Taxes are how empires rose and fell. Taxes are how societies are structured, how governance works across the world. So it's time that we take a closer look at how taxes actually emerged and how they evolved over time. Now, if you look at the very beginning, taxes actually have a religious origin. Today, while religion, ruler, and state are seen as separate entities, in ancient times, they were all one and the same. In most early civilizations, the Egyptians, Mesopotamians, the Chinese, or the Mesoamericans, the ruler was viewed as God. Therefore, paying tribute to the ruler was not just a legal obligation, it was a religious obligation. Ancient civilizations usually had two major forms of taxes: labor and tithe. You have to acknowledge that these early civilizations did not have any kind of money, at least not in the way that we think of money today. So people paid their taxes in kind, and that's where the first form of tax comes in: labor. Almost every free man in ancient society was subject to providing months of labor to their rulers. How else do you think these impressive monuments ever got built? Of course, not everyone was a fan of this scheme. In ancient Babylonia, people actually termed it as the burden. It's probably why the term tax burden makes so much sense today. And those with the means tried to avoid the labor service altogether. They would send their slaves or hire someone instead. Now, of course, this was technically illegal. However, at the time, proper identification was not really a thing, and it was easy to send someone on your behalf claiming it was you. Alright, that was all about labor tax. Now let's talk about the second form of tax, tithe, which was about sending a portion of your goods to the authorities. Now, the problem with this was that governments such as those in Mesopotamia abused the system. They tried to tax everything and anything that they could get away with. Now, because many of these taxes had a religious origin, their collection was actually ritualized. For instance, in ancient Egypt, the collection of taxes was an event that took place every 2 years. The pharaoh would go on a royal tour throughout the kingdom, appearing before his people, collecting his due. Now, over time, tax collection became more than just a means of sustaining a government. It became the means of forming a vast empire. Some believe that this is how Persia managed to create its empire. At its height, Persia stretched from Libya to what is modern-day Pakistan. The rulers managed to keep their massive realm intact through the creation of royal domains. And to keep things in check, local administrators ruled these domains on behalf of the Shahanshah, his family, or the state officials. In return for their loyalty and services, these local administrators were given a portion of the local tax revenue. Effectively, Persia had created one of the world's first bureaucracies. Now, it wasn't all about just creating complex governance processes. Beyond keeping the empire functioning, they also aided in the flow of people and information. Together with small road stations, these domains served as reliable supply points for traveling state officials, messengers, and military contingents. It made movement over large geographical distances much easier. As societies progressed, it became harder for rulers to make people believe that they were a personification of some god, and this of course would make it much harder for them to justify taxes. However, some societies took a different approach, a more secular perspective on taxes. To them, taxes was a form of civic duty. Among such societies were the ancient Greeks. And because of this very different perspective, their tax system was far less stringent. In ancient Greece, there was no concept of regular taxes. In most Greek city-states, there was only one method of taxation, called the aisphora. This tax was only applied to the richest members of the Greek society and levied only in times of great need, such as war. And what's more interesting is that a person even had the right to reject this tax if they had a belief that someone wealthier was not being taxed enough. Some of the larger Greek city-states such as Athens did charge other forms of taxes. However, these taxes were minimal and meant for the benefit of the citizen rather than the government. These types of taxes included duty tax on cargo, which was kept around 1%, and a special tax called liturgy. Now, liturgy tax was applied to only the wealthiest of the wealthy in Athens. It was meant to finance any public project that was too expensive for one individual to bear. The tax enabled Athenians to construct powerful warships, fund the building of great temples and gymnasiums, and at times it even supported theatrical plays for entertainment. But what's probably most fascinating is that the super wealthy competed on who could donate the largest sums of money to liturgy. It's pretty wild to think that rich people were competing to pay taxes. Moving on, we have the Romans and their infamous bureaucracy. Ruling a vast empire was difficult and expensive, and it didn't help that the Romans were often displacing the existing elites. So rather than relying on local lords and chiefs, the Romans made use of private tax farmers. Officially, there was a certain tax rate set by the government, but there was nothing to prevent these tax farmers from collecting taxes way above the official rate. This opened up the possibility of extreme corruption. It's probably why many of the provinces were subject to an unusually high number of unauthorized, illegal revenue-generating schemes. But the greed of the tax collectors didn't just end there. They would collude with other Roman capitalists and buy up and stock grain at the harvest season. And then, during time of grain shortages, they were sold back at highly inflated prices. And of course, many people became hard-pressed to just have enough money to survive. And to make things worse, these tax farmers loaned their ill-gotten money back to the local people, charging extremely high interest rates. It's no wonder that tax farmers have been so persistently lumped with sinners in the Bible. Now, the Roman Empire was constantly short on funds to maintain its vast professional army. So you'd think that the government would clamp down on the corruption of its officials. It would have been the logical thing to do. But instead, the Roman government continued to slap even more taxes on ordinary people. They even reintroduced the land tax on Italian citizens, something it had done away for centuries. Apart from that, it also imposed special tolls and fees on commercial activities. They even went as far as granting everyone in the empire citizenship, just so that they could collect more taxes. Over time, people expected very little from their governments except more taxes. I mean, it's no wonder why, during the empire's final days, at least in the West, many citizens actually sided with the invaders, even fought alongside them. Now look, many aspects of civilization such as military infrastructure and governance are too much for any individual to bear. That's where taxes come in. Taxes help to divide the responsibility of large but essential expenses. But taxes should be kept just at that. When the state makes use of taxes not in the welfare of citizens but to live off it, then it continues into tyranny. And we've seen far too many examples of this time and time again across multiple time periods and across multiple geographies. That's why the tax structure that was imposed by the Greeks in the ancient times was very interesting. I mean, when you have the rich competing to pay taxes, that must have been a very unique and interesting part of the world. I made a video about that right here, so check it out and I'll see you soon.